Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our fireside chat. I don't know where the fire is. We could call it a seaside chat. Whatever it is, it's going to be a great session. I want to thank everybody for enduring a long day. We got some really good stuff lined up, beginning with this session, and then we're going to have a beautiful dinner downstairs. One of the things that LSI works really hard at doing is shining a light on the innovators and the investors and all of you, the people that are building our industry. We want to shine a light on the stories that define our industry, and we want to do that so that we can all learn from each other. And so a big component of this panel, we're going to talk about some triumphs, I think, right? And we're also going to talk about some of the challenges that come along with those triumphs. And so I think there's a lot to be learned. I want to thank Josh for joining us, Anne for joining us, and sharing their experiences and their stories. And I want to thank our friend and partner, Roger, here for moderating another amazing session, right? We're expecting an amazing session out of this, all right? Just so you know. So with that, I'm going to turn it over and enjoy the evening. Let's get after it.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Scott. And thanks again for putting on an amazing conference with such an amazing team. I'm Roger Brooks, founder, creator of RBrooks Group, a retained C-suite search firm. And I'm so thrilled to have both Anne and Josh here, who are two of the most incredible innovators in our industry. And we're going to start out with maybe a brief introduction, but I think their introduction will get phased through the process. And so maybe kind of a brief introduction, and then we're going to start out with talking about innovation, and each one has their own model or organization. So they're going to talk about their philosophies around innovation and how they think about it. And then we're going to move into some of their success stories. And then at the end, we're going to try to save 5-10 minutes for questions. So think of your questions and raise your hand and we'll get to you. Maybe we'll start out with Anne from MD Start.
Good evening.
Yeah.
So you want me to introduce myself?
Yes, introduce yourself.
Sure.
And there are so many things to say. I could do it for you if you wanted me to.
Do you want to take a stab at it? We can compare notes. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Anne. I'm a partner at Sofinnova Partner. I'm also the CEO of Moon Surgical, which is an incredible surgical robotics company. I've always wanted to be a doctor, but I'm not a doctor. I am a biomedical engineer by background. But I've, basically found a way to work and interact with physicians on a daily basis and spend a lot of time in hospitals, understanding their problems and then trying to build solutions to address those. So that's, my passion, and happy to share some, successes and failures tonight.
I'm Josh Makower. I'm an entrepreneur, inventor, investor. I'm the co-founder of Stanford Biodesign, which we started about 23 years ago to train the next generation of innovators. I'm also still a chairman and founder of ExploreMed, where we continue to create new companies, and a special partner at NEA.
And both have been friends for a long time. In fact, I like to think I met Josh in, oh gosh, we should know the year. It was a long time ago. He hadn't even graduated from medical school yet. But so let's start with, there are so many amazing things I can say about both of these individuals, and you can always find their profiles online, but I think a lot of people know already a lot about them. So let's start with MD Start, which is based out of Paris. It's can I call it an incubator or innovator?
Sure.
And so give us your philosophy for MD Start. What's it all about, and how do you think about the companies that you pull through the process?
So MD Start is a medtech company builder. It's a hybrid structure between a seed fund, a team of entrepreneurs, and an incubator. And we are, focusing on identifying, issues that clinicians and providers have, generally speaking, and then developing solutions to address those. We have a very specific way of doing that, which is our own filter, which is that we rely and build on ideas that other people have. We typically don't do the ideation part. We interact with clinicians who have concepts that can tackle some of their daily limitations. And we partner with these clinicians, we build companies around them, and then we have a very systematic de-risking approach in the early stages of these ventures.
Pretty cool. Yeah. I would say notionally, MDStart and ExploreMed have a lot of similarities. The one difference, of course, is that we use effectively the biodesign process to invent and create the solutions that we find as a result of the rigorous need finding and that we teach our students at Stanford. I actually practice this here. We practice it at ExploreMed. We basically start with a blank slate and a big problem, and then try to understand it better on route to inventing a solution that is novel and has the potential to, be a company.
And he doesn't say that lightly. There's a book out there called Biodesign. Has anybody raise your hand if you've seen the book on biodesign? Well, that's fascinating. Okay, so if you haven't seen it, it's a great tool. It takes everything and kind of helps lay it out. So let's move into some of your success stories. Now, so what I heard Anne does, Anne in her group tends to work on the clinical side and work with clinical innovators who are solving unique problems, where I think Josh's program works with, I don't want to say just engineers, teams of people who are studying the problems. And they're both successful ways to do it. So why don't you talk about some of the companies you've been close to and talk about that success story and how it all came to be.
So for me, one of the greatest successes is seeing a project and a therapy get into the clinic. It's probably one of the early milestones that you can achieve where there's a significant amount of de-risking that has occurred already. There's a lot to be dealt with in the future, but at least in my shoes, it's one of the most satisfying moments in what we do. It's one of the main reasons why we do it, and just bringing those innovations to patients. I've been myself in the room during 4 first-in-human procedures for 4 different companies, and there's just nothing that compares to that. In the MDStart portfolio, we have brought numerous companies into the clinic, and I think that in itself today is a first successful achievement.
Why don't you highlight a couple of the companies you've been close to, and tell us about how it started, and then what happened to it? How did it end?
Yeah, I'll give an example of a company where we have the CEO here in the audience, May Health, which is focusing on polycystic ovarian syndrome. So women affected by infertility initially as an indication due to polycystic ovarian syndrome. And this is a project that had been around for a number of years and had looked for funding, but did not have initial prototyping work, did not have initial proof of concept, and was dormant in a way. So through our network, we identified there was an opportunity there. Basically, someone told us, "Hey, you should look into Ziva." At the time, I mean, the company has changed names so many times now, but at the time it was Ziva Medical, and we started looking into it. I think we had a genuine interest for women's health. And realized how prevalent this syndrome was. I mean, it's about 1 out of 10 women, if not more, and the difficulties they were facing. And we started small, right? We basically started using off-the-shelf devices, doing ex vivo work in my kitchen with Marion, who's there in the audience. Then went through, of course, all the preclinical de-risking, regulatory de-risking, etc. But the most important to me is if you fast forward by only 4 or 5 years, we now have tens, 10 babies, 10 to 20 babies, underway or who have been born from women who have benefited from this treatment. And the company is developing outstanding clinical results and has an approval from the FDA to initiate its pivotal study. So the speed at which you can develop things when you do it in a very structured and systematic way is amazing.
Go ahead.
So my most people focus success. I like what you focused on because that's a very good milestone. Some people focus on success as like sort of the ultimate exit, the IPO or the big acquisition, and we've been fortunate to have a few of those. But I actually, when I'm with my teams, I really talk about success looking very differently, which is something that is actually equally as hard to achieve, but also much more durable, which is creating a group of people that you have work with, a team, all focusing with a common goal and sharing that flow, that energy that comes from achieving something that really has never been done before, and the fulfillment that you see by accomplishing various milestones together and all of that. And many times these exit events, which by others might seem as a success, actually can come with a lot of heartache because the team is now going to be broken up and it's going to change. So I often when my teams get together and we're having those moments, I say, folks, this is what success looks like. It's actually what we're doing right here, this dinner right now, all of us focusing on something together and sharing a common vision that actually is what success looks like.
Well put. And what I don't want to forget about is the enormous successes these two people have had, either them or their firms that they played part of, which I'm not going to be able to hit them all from the top, but how many were billion or close to a billion becomes Corval, which comes from Sofinnova, and then Acclarent, and then Neotract,
Shockwave,
and Shockwave, and Recor. And the list can keep going on, but they've had a lot of experiences with seeing things through. Now, I want you to both think about a company that people think of and they think, wow, that was such a success story. But differently because you were in the inside. You didn't quite see it go so smoothly. So share with us a bit about the company and then the challenges that were faced, and then bring it back to lessons learned for the audience about the perseverance it takes to succeed, and how all these successful stories had a lot of perseverance. They had challenges. They had things that could have stopped them along the way. So pick your favorite ones.
I mean, I would say that it's never entirely smooth, right? By definition, what we're doing is category creation. At least that's what we like, right? I mean, it's not what everybody does, but we like to pioneer therapies that are going to completely change the way patients are managed. And when you do that, there's an inherent basically doubt when you speak to people initially. It's just part of human nature, right? I mean, they're going to be enthused and sort of convinced, but there's also a lot of reluctancy to change, and this is true from investors and some clinicians and people you're trying to hire. I mean, it's true pretty much across the board. So I think all of these companies, at least the ones that I know and that you've cited, have been through some of these moments of great doubt, and it often materializes through financing crisis or difficulties, right? I mean, you have something that has been very, well thought and systematically de-risked. You have some initial proof, but nobody's willing to jump and trust you with that idea. And I think a lot of companies share that story.
Yeah, for us, I think there's lots of good examples. In fact, I don't know personally of a single success that hasn't gone through the valley of death. The one example that that comes to mind that is Neotract, which was my co-founder, Ted Lamson, would say was a 12-year overnight success, where, well, first, I'm going to try to condense this because there were so many moments where it's like, it didn't work, or we had a problem, or we had something that went completely sideways. Our first version of the device did not work. The second version of the device did work, and we finally got some decent clinical data, and we took it to the FDA right in the middle of the worst time at FDA, around the 2008 timeframe, where they had decided that they were going to change their whole mindset on medical devices. And we began at that point just trying to get an IDE started in the United States. After probably, I don't know, 300-400 patients treated in Europe already, we found ourselves in a dire situation with the FDA, where the first letter that came back to our IDE submission had maybe 30 questions, some of which required restarting and redoing animal studies for a particular variable that they were interested in, which we fought for a while about, and then finally said, okay, we'll do it. And then, a year and a half later, show back up with that data, all the studies done, and this FDA says, thank you for doing all this to our complete satisfaction. You've answered all our questions. We have 30 more questions for you. And it just went like this for about 3.5 years, and literally about $30+ million worth of investors' money went into just keeping the company going over that time. It was a disaster. I mean, it was just so many difficult moments where, my mentor, John Nera, who was our board member representative at NEA at the time, would just come to me and say, like, is this thing going to work or what? I mean, I'm like, it's going to work, John. And I think that sort of underlines sort of one of the through lines is your investors, their understanding and patience, but also belief is what sustained us, because there was every bit of a moment to give up and turn away. And it took us literally 3.5 years to get finally to begin our IDE in the United States. After that, it wasn't like it was all smooth sailing from there, but those moments were critical to be able to surpass that and just finally get the chance to prove it,
Yeah, we have a very similar example with one of our companies, LymphFlow, that probably got 5 disapproval letters from the FDA on its IDE, and you have to keep the company afloat for, in our case, it was 2.5 years. Their issue was around this preclinical model, finding something that replicated below the knee, and made sense. And the company got FDA approval last week, right? So you get there, but it takes, years, and you don't plan for that in any business model. Yeah. You don't plan for waiting 2 to 3 years for an approval to start a study from the FDA. You don't plan for a version of your device just simply not working in the clinic. You plan for things that are going to take, maybe, more money and more time, but not these complete cycles. Because you would never raise money if you did, right? So you kind of have to, pretend it's going to be okay. But in reality, it's not. And so working with the right people is everything in these instances.
You always have to have that game face on, I imagine. Yeah. So when you guys run into your challenges with your companies where something's not quite going right, you go back to, I call it a living document, but you've got something you go back to, right? Yeah. Where you're constantly pressure testing what you're doing, and you're asking, should we keep doing this? Tell us about that. What do you want? What would you suggest to anybody with the company? What do they need to have in place so that they can keep doing a gut check to make sure they should continue on?
I think, it's not necessarily a document or a set of specifications or assumptions. I think it's the people and the science that you go back to. It's, do you have a group that's going to be able to overcome this challenge? Do you have a group that is okay with working in this environment, because that's pretty much the daily life of a startup, and can trust you as a leader or whoever the management is to solve it together? And then do you have the actual data to support your thesis, the thesis that was behind the company in the first place? Looking back at this data or generating it if you need to.
Yeah, for us, it actually is, I wouldn't necessarily a document, but it is a thing. And it's part of the biodesign process, which is to create this thing that we call the need specification, which some people call need criteria, which is what are we trying to achieve? It's a summary across all the stakeholders of what actually is the outcome that we believe is transformational, and that we've invested so many months of energy, years sometimes, in developing. That then becomes our sort of golden vision that we're always shooting for, and keeps us focused through these challenges. And the question we're always asking is, have we learned anything about this that is untrue? If we still believe it's possible and we still see the evidence that it's achievable, that gives us the reason to believe and allows us to persevere. And I totally encourage everybody here to have one of those, and basically a real vision of what you're shooting for in the details of what needs to move people to do this instead of what they're doing today. And if you still believe that's possible, that can get you through those moments, because there's all these challenges, so many challenges, clinical, enrollment, and money raising, and building your team, and overcoming doubt. But that to us sort of is the through line that we can see through to sort of an ultimate goal, and gives us confidence that it's going to be there. And like after 12 years with NeoTract, and I'm with another company right now, MoxyMed, finally got their FDA approval several months ago. But after 10 years of work, I think those are that gets us through all of that, because we still believe that's going to have a transformational outcome for patients. And it's evidenced in the data, but it does take a long time sometimes.
So fast forward that with, you have it with your management team, your senior team, your employees. Let's talk about the investors and the board members. How do you bring that forward, especially when times are good, things are going right? How do you keep bringing that forward so that when something's not going right, they're like you, they go back to the same space? Is there to me, repeating it at every board meeting, or is there a process to help keep your investors locked in to that same thing?
I mean, I think choosing your investors very wisely is so fundamentally important. You need to work with people who share the same beliefs and values that you do, and are willing to persevere. I think we all would love, I think investors love a quick exit, all those kinds of things. This probably isn't the right space. In fact, healthcare in general probably isn't the right space for that. But if you're here, there's probably another reason for being here. But having those investors that will stay with you when the going gets tough is really what it's all about. And the way you can tell that is look at their track record. Look at the background, see what they have persevered, and to ultimately arrive at a conclusion. And that's a great way to find people that are ready to, strap in for the journey and stay along for the entire ride.
I agree. No, I think you could see it from, experienced people will know, right, that this is part of the life of a startup, and they'll have demonstrated that they can, help in these situations.
So this isn't necessarily a plug for LSI, but I call it, before I do search work for a company, I look at who's got their money into it, and I call it a sophisticated investor. So there could be investors who are really smart. They could be very, very smart people. Maybe they made their fortune in oil and gas or some area, but they're not a sophisticated medtech investor. They haven't lived through all the trials and tribulations, right? And those are the people that seem to get it when something doesn't go right. They'll be standing by your side, which is more likely to be an investor here at LSI because they get it and they're interested. And so pay attention to those people who have a lot of passion and interest around medical devices. Otherwise, yeah, you mess up your cap table. And we can probably talk forever about all these really, really good companies out there that had the right idea, they were on the right track, but they didn't have the right investment group.
And the other thing to mention is, like, the great thing about meetings like this, and congratulations, Scott, on this event and building LSI to be able to accomplish such a fantastic meeting. So congratulations
Thank you,
to
Scott.
you and your team. But one of your greatest resources, everybody, is standing right next to you. This community is what is so powerful to be able to help each other. We're all trying to do the same thing. There are very few moments where we have direct competitors in this group, but even when you do, we really are trying to do something really good. And I found, just coming up as an entrepreneur, that the greatest resource are my colleagues who can tell me, how did you navigate that? And I find this community in particular to be tremendously generous because of that shared goal.
And just to build on that, that becomes, when you're facing those problems, don't hesitate to reach out because everybody wants to help, right? And you as a CEO, you're helping other people, but they want to help you as well. So don't hesitate to do that. And Ann and Josh would love to help, but my goodness, I don't know how they do it. They have got more irons in the fire. But I could email them and they respond within 30 seconds. I don't know how they do it. Must be AI.
I wish.
Yeah. And so how about, why don't you hit one more thing around advice around perseverance, how to get through the tough times, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for a couple of questions from the audience.
So perseverance, I think Josh, nailed it. I mean, you have to pick the people, right? Whether it's on your leadership team or in your investors or on your board. I don't think you can prepare people for what goes wrong. I mean, you can to some degree, but it's more of a mindset and, a willingness to, not panic and work constructively on solutions together. I think another part of it is empowering people, in your leadership team. You have to, basically give people an opportunity to voice ideas and different options, and this makes you much better as a leader for basically navigating through these issues. And so I think to some degree being transparent on the challenges within the leadership team, within the company, with your board, goes a long way, right? Because everybody is here to help. And some of your board members will have faced similar issues. They will have someone in their Rolodex who could help on something in particular.
Don't surprise them. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. I think and there's no point in being complacent about things. You need to just face the facts and be forthcoming about what doesn't work, right? If you really want to get help.
Yeah, and I know I see many great innovators here, and you know this, but every day there's another reason to give up right in front of you. It always just comes, right? And just being able to have and you all, many leaders here too, many CEOs here, that you see it, your team sees it, but what makes the difference is to be able to accept those things, learn from failures, learn from mistakes, just pick yourself up and keep on going, and to keep your team focused on that vision, on where we're going and why it matters. Make it a simple message, keeps everybody focused to get to the ultimate goal.
Ah, well put. Scott, do you have another mic out there by chance? Okay. Steal mine. Raise your hand if you've got a question.
So, Josh, nice to see you again. I just wanted to mention, as an entrepreneur, you haven't mentioned, but when I visited the Biodesign Center in Stanford, I didn't know about the Pediatric Device Consortium. Yes. And as an entrepreneur, it has saved our lives. I mean, the amount of the advice paid by the FDA, by the US funding to help entrepreneurs with the knowledge of your center is phenomenal. I mean, we have reimbursement advice, regulatory usability from the best minds that have done it before. So first, thank you to you and the Biodesign Center. And what are the lessons learned? Why don't we have more consortia? What are the lessons learned from this consortia that we can extrapolate to other domains or even in Europe? So what did you learn from there? Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Look, I mean, Biodesign, many fellows here, is powered by people who just want to give back, right? So sometimes pulling together a consortia is really the extra thing that you do. Many of our faculty are already with their startups or with their jobs, but they take extra time from their schedules to do this because they care about the next generation, they care about helping others. And I believe, like I said, in this community, there's a lot of that sentiment. And so I think if we tap into that and coalesce it, you can just create these things that benefit the whole community. And I think it's a great thing to do. So I encourage it. And it just takes that, one or two people to sort of come together to decide to spend a focused amount of time just helping each other. That's basically where it starts. Another question.
Hi, Almog from Coordinate Vision. So you talked about the FDA pushing back on IDE submission, requesting all of these science exercises and requests for additional tests and animal trials. We've been through that. And as an Israeli company, when the FDA asks, you do. But what we realize is that you can actually push back on that. We've just, worked with a US consultant who worked at the FDA, and he just pushed back on that, and we got our first device approved. Do you see a lot of these cases around? I mean, it's...
Yeah, I can comment on that because I was on a call yesterday with a fellow surgical robotics company strategizing on how we would answer similar questions that we got from the FDA. I think, when you're in a process with the FDA, there are moments in the process where it's about getting into that dialogue and pushing back and arguing. And then there are other moments in the process where you have less of an opportunity to do so. But even though I think, basically benchmarking and working with experienced consultants who have that, experience from other companies in the same space goes a very long way. Because in a way, it's the group of companies that do similar things to your company that are going to define the new standard for what the FDA is willing to accept or not, right? And so if everybody just does what the FDA says, then the bar keeps getting higher and higher. But if there's, and that's where the peer-to-peer aspect and sharing can be extremely powerful, right? It's basically, if people have or learn from each other with these more reasonable approaches and go back to the FDA, you can accomplish a lot. So yes, this happens all the time, and I think it's very powerful, essentially. Right?
Yeah, we were actually, were avoided a second animal trial by convincing them to use Israelis and Europeans as models.
That's great.
Might not put it that way, but no, I mean, you can push back until you can't push back anymore. I mean, that doesn't always work, but you can make a lot of headway. I mean, recognizing that these are people trying to protect other people, and you have to sort of get to the root of what is the source of their concern and try to get them another way to be feeling comfortable about it, because they're in this position. They tend to not have as much experience as you might have, and so they're afraid, so how do you release them from that fear and try to comfort them with whatever data or explanations you can? It's not as much about an argument, it's more about
providing alternatives. I mean, helping them with options. Yeah.
Thanks, guys, for the fantastic fireside. I'm Henry from LSI, and at LSI USA 23 in Dana Point, I got to moderate a panel with Josh DeFonso from Lux and Mendera, and Dennis McWilliams from Sante, and the panel was about how kind of the two hats of being an entrepreneur, an executive, and a venture partner kind of change your perspective on both sides, how you think about venture, how you support portfolio companies, how you conduct diligence, and then on the flip side, how you build your own company, how you build your own team, how you position it with investors. And we have a very similar setup with both of you and with Sofinnova and MD Start and Josh with NEA. I'm very curious to hear from your perspective, how does that play in your current role with Moon Surgical and the companies you've built and continue building? How does that dual hat affect both sides of your work?
That's a great question. I would say it's a challenge from an agenda standpoint. That being said, I'm an operator by background, by nature. At my heart, I couldn't see myself doing anything else than building companies. I have a very hard time at the end of the day if I have not produced something, and feel very frustrated. So I would say, people ask me, hey, how do you manage the CEO job and the investor job? I'm like, how do you manage without the CEO job? I mean, really, I can't imagine that. But you're right. It's I think having that visibility on what's expected from the other side, being on these boards and in a position where you're trying to help CEOs and entrepreneurs solve problems, is immensely helpful in understanding what's expected from you. And I think we're leveraging that every day at Moon Surgical, of course.
Yeah, I think as a learning, sort of up and coming entrepreneur, for me, it was fantastic to be able to sit on the other side of the table and understand that perspective. And I think the concept of sort of a triple win, you're going for winning with patients, you want to win for your team, and you want to win for the investors. And if you can do all three of those, it's a win. That's what a win looks like. We can't always accomplish that, but nothing ever gets sacrificed if you don't win with the patients first, right? And if you don't reward your team for a win for the investors, then you're not doing it right. They're not going to work with the investors again, right? So all three parties have to win, and understanding what that win means to each is really important. And being inside, seeing like how investors look at it is super helpful to achieve that.
Yeah, I think there's probably a general just lack of awareness of what the constraints of an investor are, and it's just the way things are. And we had a CEO workshop last week with our CEOs and some of the leadership members, where Antoine Papiernik attended, and I think just hearing him share some of the current challenges and opportunities, but also just what success means to him was extremely, basically precious to our CEOs to adjust basically their asks and the way they interact with investors. Yeah, well, I think when you're an investor, you're not investing your own money, right? You need to raise funds. I mean, that's a pretty basic thing, but it happens every 3 to 4 years. It's very similar to, a company raising money, which means extremely painful, especially those days. And it comes with a lot of complexities. It then drives a notion of life cycle when you're in a fund. So you need to understand where the investor is at when they do the investment in your company, what those timelines are going to look like, what the constraints of the people in front of you are, and how that people is going to be measured on success. And there's not a lot of opportunities to discuss that. In a board meeting, you're discussing about the company, but I think having those, more informal discussions where you can, get a better, broader understanding can be very helpful.
And I just say, to add on to that, it's about trust. If you trust it's all about who you bring on your team, bring in investors that you trust, and then you should bring them into your world, share with them the challenges so that they can, be with you on the same side of the table, trying to solve them. They have different tools than you do, but all working together, that's the best. And I think sometimes people view their investors as sort of like the enemy, maybe, there to squeeze out whatever they can get out of it. That's not a good relationship. If that's the case, you may not have chosen well. But it really is about bringing your investors onto your team and exposing them to your challenges and making them all collectively your challenges. And then it's a lot easier to solve those problems, especially when you can view it for their eyes and what tools they have as well as you.
Hey, Evan from Icarus, thank you guys for a great talk. You mentioned something really interesting, that every company you've seen that was successful passed through the valley of death, right? What is the difference between those that are successful and those that aren't? And what can an early stage company do to prepare for that stage?
I mean, just from my perspective, remember I talked about that need spec that we create in the beginning? The moment that you realize whatever technology is not going to do it, or that you got it wrong, that's the moment that I say, okay, no, we're not going to make it. That could ideally happen early, really early. I mean, that's what we're really trying to do. We sort of switch and experiment. We go in this mode of, unbridled creativity and come up with as many ideas as we can. And then we flip that immediately, like, how do we kill this thing? What's going to make it fail? And then we just focus on making it fail so we can fail fast. But sometimes the answer doesn't come fast. Sometimes it comes really late. And then you have to look at the data. And I'll give the example in my own experience of one company that we shut down after investing, $45 million in it. It was a company called Vibrant. And we did our clinical study and we looked at the data halfway through, and it's like, we're not going to get there. We're not going to produce the outcome that we really dreamed was possible. And we're going to come way short of it. And then we don't see a way to actually fix it. And that was the moment that we decided we're done. We're going to shut this one down. So that's the moment, at least for me, that I know that should not proceed.
Yeah, I think we should recognize that it can be hard from a CEO's hat to do that, right? Because by definition, you fall in love with a project and you invest, days and nights doing that. And, going back to the earlier question, I think that's also where, collectively solving for issues and looking at things straight, and also in our case, wearing our, more investor hat can be very, helpful.
And I know we got to wrap up, but I'll throw one more thing at you. When I was, one of my first companies achieved a not great outcome, but it was an outcome. And I figured, but we did the best we could, and we achieved the thing. Anyway, I was wondering, what am I going to do with my life? Because I'm obviously not a good entrepreneur. I got to do something else. And I ran into the founder of NEA in the lobby. And he was like, so what are we going to do next? I was like, you're still going to work with me after that performance? He's like, oh, yeah. I mean, we're investing in you. That's the long-term view. We actually think what you're going to do next is going to be even better. You learned from this. We want to do what is next. Because of the way we work together, because, like I said, we brought them on the side. The next one was Acclarent, and the next one was Neotract. And so I learned from that experience that, investors, those of you who are investors, those of you who are entrepreneurs, you want to be working with people who are really investing in you, because that's actually going to produce the best long-term results.
Okay. All right. So, round of applause for Josh and Ann for sharing their thoughts. Really, really appreciate it.